Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China, and I'm Jerry, coming to you today from a pretty crappy hotel room in Guangzhou. Today I'm going to talk about a young Australian man, an individual called Drew Pavlou. Drew's making a name for himself as an anti-China protester, being mistreated by the evil CCP and their global army of followers, which seems quite strange since it's unlikely the Chinese government at any level even know who he is, or if they do know, wouldn't care. They aren't really interested in an individual with almost no following in any social or political arena who's on a personal crusade to earn additional income. Let's be clear here. I don't have any personal problem with Drew Pavlou. I find him a little arrogant, mildly irritating, but he doesn't affect my life in any way. However, because I live in China and because I speak positively of China, he does come across my timeline often. Also, because I was a police officer in the past and he's often in conflict with the police, I tend to get asked for my opinion on him quite a lot. He does have a few supporters, that much is obvious. His supporters will attack me here, as they do on Twitter, because I am going to be a little critical. That's normal, I'm quite used to it. I'm not going to tell any lies. The information here is all widely available. It comes from his tweets, and the opinions I share are shared by many people. So if you are a supporter of Drew and you think he's a great guy, you think he's up against an evil machine, that's fine. Your interactions with me will help my exposure and it will be good for me, so interact away. One other point to be noted about this young man is, in my opinion anyway, I think he's very clever. He hasn't graduated university yet. He was suspended a couple of years ago after complaints of bullying, and after being reinstated he decided not to go straight back to university because he wanted to run for the Senate. This was a folly based on being supported by a large group of Chinese diasporas, mostly Hong Kong, Tibetan and some Xinjiang exiles, who don't even get to vote in Australia, so how he thought he would win with that support I don't know. He supports himself through public donations. In 2021 alone, he raised over $65,000 by various crowdfunding platforms. His 2022 election bid raised another $60,000 when he wanted to go to London to protest the disappearance of Peng Shuai. He was funded by an anti-CPC organization. Then when he got arrested there, he crowdfunded his legal fees, and once again his supporters rallied around with more donations. Currently, China has a drought, it has a heat wave, it has a pandemic, it has a massive population to keep happy. So a young man who protests outside their consulate in Brisbane is no more than a nuisance. If he blocks their public entry, then he's a problem for the local police, because the entry to the Chinese consulate in Brisbane is the entry to a very tall building with dozens of companies, hundreds of employees. There's even a coffee shop on the ground floor. Police wouldn't be called because he's bothering the Chinese diplomats on the 9th floor, but because he inconveniences everybody else. When Drew visited Sydney a couple of months ago and he went to a shopping mall in a predominantly Chinese part of the city, 10% of the population of Sydney are Chinese, he held up a placard which can be translated as an expletive relating to the Chinese people. His interpretation was that it was intended to insult Xi Jinping, but whatever his motivations, he certainly riled up some Chinese people there, caused a bit of a fracas, and ended up being told he was going to be charged by the police. Once again, this is not something the Communist Party of China can be held responsible for. I certainly wouldn't expect anyone to accuse the Australian government of supporting my actions if I insult people. I've been asked by many people if I know him. The answer is always that I know of him and I know people who do know him. He once interacted with me in direct messages on Twitter because I'd raised a tweet that said, "I think he's a smart young man who's been misled." He liked the sound of that. I still stand by that statement, but he's since blocked me on Twitter. I'm sure he likes to hear the "he's a smart young man" comment, but he hates the criticism, and he actually doesn't seem very interested in the truth either. He was arrested outside the Chinese embassy in London during a publicity stunt. By his own admission, he went to the embassy with a view to causing criminal damage and was equipped to do so. Under British law, this is an offence, albeit a minor one, but at the same time there was a bomb threat made to the embassy through an email address that he states is not his but uses his name. So there are three separate issues here. Trespass on diplomatic premises is a civil matter and not a serious one. I once actually served on the Diplomatic Protection Group in London, and our instructions would have been to remove him from the property. If he didn't leave, it would have resulted in an arrest, but only for breach of the peace, a very minor offence, and that's used because there's no power of arrest for trespass. And since this is a diplomatic premises, it's effectively another country that he's invaded if he's on their property. The end result of that would have been at worst a warning from a magistrate, or maybe even less, a rocketing from a sergeant in the police station. The next offence is slightly more serious, but again not life-changing: going equipped to cause criminal damage. In order for a police officer to arrest for this, they would need to prove his intent. In a later tweet, Drew admitted that he had planned to paste posters with superglue to the embassy gates. That's clear intent. And if he'd said that to the officer, he could have been arrested. Once again, it's a minor offence. Police officers would normally use discretion and simply tell him to bugger off. It's only if the offender is aggressive, argumentative, or belligerent that he would get arrested. The worst case scenario, someone doing this would be put in front of a magistrate and probably receive a fine. As a foreigner, Drew could also be required to leave the country within a specified period of time, but the word deportation is a little too strong to use for this. The final offence is serious. Police informed Drew that the Chinese embassy had received a bomb threat signed in his name from an email address using his name. The embassy would have advised the police and provided them with all the evidence that they had, and the police would necessarily have acted on that information. This is not the CPC picking on Drew. This is a normal operational procedure at every embassy or public building in pretty much the world. Now, if Drew had not made such a circus about what he planned to do, no one would have bothered to have been involved in this. Making a bomb threat in this day and age is a very serious matter. Police kept Drew in custody for about 12 hours, and that's something they're legally entitled to do. They confiscated his phone and they bailed him to reappear at the police station after a period of time for the investigation to progress. No one knows the results of that investigation as yet, other than the investigating officers, Drew himself, and his lawyers if they were in attendance when he returned to answer to his bail conditions on the 14th of August. What is known is that Drew was charged and bailed to appear at a magistrate's court on an unspecified date. We don't know what offences he was charged with, but I strongly suspect they relate to the intent to cause criminal damage, perhaps a trespass, and perhaps some sort of resistance of arrest. Drew vehemently denies making the bomb threat, and to be honest, I believe him. He isn't stupid, and despite some idiotic pranks to gain attention, he isn't an idiot. Placing his name on the bottom of an email sent from his own phone would be idiotic, and I credit him with more sense than that, but I could be wrong. What also makes me think he didn't make the bomb threat was that if he had, it would have been a far more serious threat to the public, and he'd likely have been arrested and held in custody until his court date or until his lawyers could arrange bail. As it was, he was released and he immediately left the UK. Now at the moment, this isn't a big problem. He has a court date, he must return and face the charges. It becomes a problem if he doesn't. So what happens next? There are three likely scenarios. I don't know which one. One is, if he was charged with minor offences, he returns to the UK, faces court, gets punished, gets a fine, and the matter is pretty much closed. The offence stays on the record for 7 years, but that would allow him to travel freely around most of the world, return home to Australia with a clean slate. Another is that he doesn't return to the UK and doesn't attend court, in which case a warrant will be issued and he'll be arrested if he ever sets foot in the UK again. The information would be on the police national computer, which is linked to the immigration computers at British ports of entry. So this warrant, like his criminal conviction, would remain in place for 7 years, after which I think it would be considered spent under a statute of limitations related to criminal damage. Now, if he returns to the UK before his due date, there aren't many problems. But if he misses his court date, he has a big problem if he ever wants to go back to the UK. The third scenario is if, and this is a huge if Drew actually made that bomb threat. If he returns to face court on this matter, he does face several years of imprisonment. So a lot of people here in China believe he did, and he's running away from that. If he doesn't return to face court, we will find out, as court reporters can see and hear the proceedings. If that happens, I think Drew will lose a lot of his support. Only those kinds of people who approve of terrorism as a method of creating change will remain. And we know for a fact Drew has at least one friend like this, self-proclaimed Xinjiang separatist Arslan Hidayat, who has vowed before Allah to be a better separatist, and he's one of Drew's supporters. So this kind of activity should dry up his lucrative crowdfunding business. Another problem Drew would face is that if he doesn't come back, a warrant would be issued for his arrest. But unlike criminal damage or trespass matters, this one is much more serious. The investigating officer would be obliged to contact the Australian police and advise them that there is an outstanding warrant for a wanted criminal in their jurisdiction. Australia's police should, under reciprocal arrangements, arrest Drew, hold him in custody, and commence extradition procedures to face charges in London, where he would be presented before a magistrate and be given an option to go to a full court with a judge and jury. This would take many months. All that time he would probably be held in custody, as he is a flight risk. What I suspect will happen is that Drew will find a way to get invited back to the UK some date before his court case, as that means someone else will be paying the bill. He will front the court and, with an arrogant smirk showing sarcastic respect to the magistrate, be issued with a fine and some kind of good behaviour bond to prevent reoccurrences. His supporters will rally around, they'll pay the fine for him, and he'll become a greater martyr to his cause. And then, after paying the fine and giving whatever speeches he's been invited to give, he'll use the excess donations to have a wonderful European holiday at his donor's expense while he plots or plans his next escapade and his next ruse to elicit funds from his blindly led supporters. We'll see. What about you? What do you think? Please leave a comment and let me know, and I'll get back to you. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China. See you next time.